Welcome. I'm Angela Da Silva, chair of the Mary Meachum Freedom Celebration. And thank you for tuning in to the 18th annual celebration. Unfortunately, we're not at the river because of the pandemic, but we still wanted to bring to you this year's program, scaled down, but this year's program, because it is far too important not to have this discussion. This year, 2020, has marked 3 different anniversaries, and I have been talking to our board for a long time about the importance of this year. It marks the 150th anniversary of the passage of the 15th Amendment, the 100-year anniversary of the right to give women the vote, and the anniversary of the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. But what I'm going to be talking to you today about is the history of voting in this country. We have had a very contested history with voting. The democratic principle that the country was founded on is that all men were created equal. And again, this has never been fully realized to this day. The one civil right that all of its citizens should have access to, or the right to a democratic government by definition, is the right of participation. That is done by the selection or voting for its representatives to lead them. These are the people who speak for you, who pass the laws for the things that you want to see done. When this country was founded, our founding document, the Constitution, did not in the beginning mention who was eligible to vote. The signers thought it was best to leave it up to the individual states to decide. And how that turned out, we had a patchwork of voter laws that differed from state to state. The original 13 colonies restricted the right to vote to free white male property owners, usually the entry price point being 50 acres of land on which taxes were paid. With the adoption of the landowner restriction, over half the white men then in the country were disenfranchised, though by 1856, most states did away with the property requirement. So who could vote? There was a revolving set of exclusions from the early part of the founding of the country. A lot of people believe that this started in the South. It did not. It started in the North. The new country was changing. There were different types of thought that were percolating through, especially New England. So again, these are the women who everyone now pretty much considers the founders of the women's suffragette movement or the women's movement period. But again, Susan B. Anthony was not at Seneca Falls. Now, these 2 women have very interesting early histories, and actually I found them fascinating because they both come from very large families. From Seneca Falls through the 13th Amendment, Douglas, Stanton, and Anthony all support universal suffrage for everyone. When the Civil War is over, and with it, so was involuntary servitude. Again, whoopee, we won. Stanton and Anthony felt that the 13th Amendment, forever abolishing slavery, was all the protection that Black men needed. Now they start gearing up for women's rights through suffrage. The 14th Amendment, which granted citizenship but not the franchise, and this is going to cause a split to the 3 amigos that'll last for years.
Frederick, a word with you.
Yes, Susan.
I and many of the suffragists take issue with the 15th Amendment and your position on it.
What issue? Blacks need and deserve the right to vote. The 14th Amendment is no good without the enfranchisement to vote for blacks.
Black men, Frederick, black men.
Susan, Susan, if my memory serves me correctly, when we were in Seneca Falls, I was the one who inserted the right for women to vote to the conventioners for the Declaration of Sentiments. And furthermore, I don't recall you being there.
That's a low blow, Frederick. Shame on you.
Shame on you for disparaging my name when I was just trying to help my people.
Shall we begin this dance?
It appears we've already started, and you have taken the lead.
How long are we going to do this dance, Frederick?
Until we get the truth. Do we both agree that suffrage should be universal?
On this we agree. Suffrage should be universal, regardless of race, creed, color, or sex. All should have the right to vote.
So we found common ground.
However,
It
it is the order in which that right should come that I must contend with.
meaning,
Will you make me say it, Frederick?
we appear to be the only ones on this dance floor. Speak your mind. Remember, my skin is still thick from the lashes of slavery.
It does not seem fit that the Negro get the right to vote before the woman. There, I said it.
What if the Negro man gets the right to vote before the white woman?
I will cut off this right arm of mine before I work or demand the ballot for the Negro and not the woman. My friend Elizabeth Cady Stanton agrees with me. The right should belong to the woman before the Negro. She says, and I quote, think of Patrick and Sambo and Hans and Young Tung, who don't even know the difference between a monarchy and a republic, who cannot read the Declaration of Independence or Webster's spelling book, making laws for Lucretia Mott, Ernestine L. Rose, and Anna E. Dickinson. Should American statesmen claiming to be liberal make their wives and mothers the political inferiors of unlettered and unwatched ditch diggers, bootblacks, butchers, and barbers, fresh from the slave plantations of the Old South and the effete civilizations of the Old World?
I say, when women, because they are women, are hunted down through the cities of New York and New Orleans, dragged from their homes, hung on lampposts, children torn from their arms, brains dashed upon the pavement, subject to insult and outrage at every turn, in danger of having their homes burned down around their heads, and children not allowed to enter schools, then women may have the urgency to obtain the ballot equal to our own.
Elizabeth and I are on the same page.
I see. But not all women, especially colored women. Have you not considered my friend Frances Watkins Harper? See, both you and Elizabeth spoke solely of the injustice of the white woman. Frances Watkins Harper's counter-argument is just as powerful as Elizabeth's. And I can tell you what she said. And I quote, "I do not believe that white women are dewdrops just exhaled from the skies. Like men, they can be divided into three classes: the good, the bad, and the indifferent. The good will vote their convictions and their principles. The bad as dictated by malice and prejudice. The indifferent will vote for the winning argument by the strongest party. You women, you white women, speak of rights. I speak of wrongs. I, as a colored woman, had the education in this country that makes me feel like I'm in the same situation as Ishmael. My hand against every man, and every man's hand against me. Are you now convinced that all women are not a monolith when it comes to the issue of suffrage?
I still do not agree. And there are others who feel the same as I do. Dr. Reverend Anna Howard Shaw, she says, "You have put the ballot in the hands of your black men, thus making them the political superiors of white women. Never before in the history of the world have men made former slaves the political masters of their former mistresses."
You have clearly articulated the voice of the dissent of the white woman, but conveniently left out the voice of the disenfranchised black woman. Have you not heard what Francis had to say?
Yes, I heard Francis's speech. You act as if I have no ears.
He who has ears, let him hear.
This is still a white man's country, and white men should rule. By inheritance, white women should follow suit.
So you've hitched your wagon to George Francis' train? A man of unspeakable character?
Train provided us with the financial resources and a platform for the cause of suffrage for white women. While you praise Frances Watkins Harper, not all colored women felt the way she did.
I'm very well aware of that, Susan. I'm pleading the 15th Amendment for the enfranchisement of the Negro because if we don't obtain it now, white supremacy will rear its ugly head again, and we will never obtain the right to vote, nor you. Power never concedes without demand, never has, and never will.
And there never will be complete equality until women themselves receive the right to make laws and elect lawmakers. On this issue, we will just have to agree to disagree.
But we don't have to be disagreeable, Susan. I'd rather enjoy this dance.
Well, I hope I live to see the day when women gain the right to vote, be they white or black.
And I hope when the 15th Amendment is finally ratified, that you will wish us well. And I promise you, we will continue to work for women's inclusion.
It'll all come to a head with Douglas supporting the 14th Amendment. Stanton and Anthony felt that women and black men should get the franchise at the same time or not at all. Now, they had fought slavery together, and they had stood shoulder to shoulder against what they saw was the great evil. And they felt that Douglas should support them in getting the right to vote, not putting black men ahead of them, but at the same time that women and black men should get the vote together. Douglas felt that although he strongly supported suffrage for women, he felt that the passage of the 13th and 14th Amendment, the time was now, and that the black community had a great urgent need for this. He felt that if black men did not get the right to vote now, that fatigue was setting in at the North. A lot of activity was going on at the South. The Union Army was occupying the South. A lot of energy and money and talent is being lost down in the South, and the North keeps saying, "Look, we fought the war; it should be over. Let it stand on its own 2 feet." And he felt that we need this one more thing, and that's the right to vote, or all of this is going to be for naught. And there were a lot of other abolitionists who felt the same way he did. Once they get the franchise and can protect themselves, they felt that when black men got the right to vote, there would be another large section of the population who would be able to press for the franchise for women. Now, what's interesting about this, Sojourner Truth sided with Stanton and Anthony. Why? because Sojourner Truth felt that if black men got the right to vote before black women, it would just be another form of oppression of black women. And she felt that she had the same whip on her back as the black male did. And she didn't feel that he should have any more rights more than she did. And she sided with Stanton and Anthony that the women should have the right to vote either at the same time or not at all. And this is all going to come to a head in 1869 at a meeting of the American Equal Rights Association in Steinway Hall. There is the Revolution that I had mentioned earlier, which was the national organ, or the newspaper for the national organization. And Katie and Stanton needed money to put this newspaper out. So they courted George Francis Train. Now, this is amazing. George Francis Train was a character. He only wore lavender all the way down to the studs, to his spats on his shoes, his lavender gloves. He ran for president 3 times under the slogan, "Women first, Negroes last." He did some incredible things, so I have to give him his props there. He did actually sail around the world in 80 days. And then Nellie Bly, the newspaper reporter, decided she was going to cut his record and did it in 66 days. And then he got mad that she undercut his record and did it again in 60 days. And so he was always doing that type of thing. He is also the person who, he was so charismatic that he was able to pull together people who would finance and actually created the Union Pacific Railroad that went coast to coast. And he will finance the revolution. But he was also such a racist that most of America could not tolerate him. He would, from wherever he went, even when he went around the world in 80 days, he actually stopped in France to meddle in their revolution. He was put in jail in Ireland for picking the wrong side of a particular national spat that they were having. Also, he was one of the first benefactors, if you will, for the Panama Canal. I mean, he did good things and he did bad things, but it was his racism that really, truly helped undo him. Now, George Francis Train was so enigmatic and intolerable to a lot of America that Horace Greeley finally had enough. And he wrote to Stanton and Susan B. Anthony a letter and said, "Do you know that you have become the laughingstock of the country by dealing with him? You need to sever ties immediately." And I think this finally got through to them, though people had been talking to them about severing ties with them.
Still planning to do this, ain't you?
Yes, I am.
Now you know what them night riders said. They said ain't no Publican-loving niggas gonna vote in Orange County. Now you need to take what they saying seriously. They didn't like the voter registration drive for women last fall, and they've been angry since then.
It is my right and my duty as a colored man. I have been free from slavery now 44 years, and I will not bow to threats and intimidation. I have to set an example for the young colored men and boys.
Why you? Let someone else.
We all have to take a stand sometime. I have started with nothing. We have built something here, something that we can hand down to our families. You should register that we can vote. Always complaining about the conditions of our colored schools. Do something about them. Vote for the people on the school board that will do something about them. There will be others voting today, I'm sure.
Maybe, but I doubt it. They's rabbits, and it's not worth risking their lives over it.
Look, I think they're just trying to scare us. I don't actually think that they'll kill us for trying to vote. At the very least, they'll just turn us away. But I'm taking the 22 for protection.
That's only gonna help you if you see them first and it's a fair fight. Now that gun will mean nothing but an excuse for them to kill you. Please, I beg you don't go. No vote is worth these. Your one vote won't be missed.
Now, what you think you're going to do here?
I'm July Norman, a registered voter, and I'm here to vote.
Is that so? Let me check the records. You won't be voting tonight, Nigra. It says here you owe a poll tax of $150.
Okay, it's new, but I can pay it.
No, you can't. The registrar left on vacation this very morning. Ain't due back for a week. Now, you get out and don't come back.
Looking at this grid, and this is not complete by no stretch of the imagination, these are just some of the massacres and murders that took place to keep Black people from voting. There were individual isolated cases. There would be cases in the swamp, houses burnt down, people missing by the hundreds, by the thousands. But obviously, there was no end to the unspeakable violence that they were willing to do to keep Black people from voting. And as late as 1920.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. This ideal was set forth nearly 250 years ago, and though it has never been fully realized in our nation's history, in the intervening time period, countless men and women have toiled and sacrificed to have our nation fully live into the boldness of this courageous declaration. Among these men and women was Mary Meachum, a woman whose actions we honor every year at the annual Mary Meachum Freedom Crossing. While this year, the global COVID-19 pandemic has interrupted our celebrations and caused us to move our activities from the riverside to the World Wide Web, the legacy of Mary Meachum and the social mandate it has inspired have never been more relevant than in these times. Many of us know that Mary Meachum was an African-American abolitionist who, with her husband, John Berry Meachum, helped enslaved Black people escape to freedom in the Underground Railroad by helping them purchase their freedom. But what some of us may not know is that in the course of her life's work, she was arrested and tried for breaking the fugitive slave law when she was caught trying to ferry 9 enslaved people across the Mississippi River to freedom in Illinois. She gave everything to the cause of freedom, and efforts like hers paved the way not only for the abolition of slavery, but also for the extension of those unalienable rights mentioned in our venerable Declaration. She wanted to make sure that these rights were available and accessible not only to white men and women, but also to African American men and women. Mary Meachum wasn't just fighting for the right to be free. She was also fighting for the full exercise of citizenship For what good would freedom be if it did not come with the promise of being able to experience those unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? This year, 2020, is a landmark year in this most sacrosanct of unalienable rights that we call voting. For consider this, how is it that the governed actually give their consent, or perhaps even withhold it? It's by voting. What is it that legitimates or nullifies government's exercise of power? It is voting. After all, voting is the principal way in which we, the governed, consent or reject our governments and their behaviors and duties. Now, here's the interesting thing. This fight for the right to vote, for the ability to officially and publicly and boldly consent or dissent, this fight experienced its first victory after slavery in the 15th Amendment. This amendment, ratified in February of 1870, right? This amendment to the U.S. Constitution granted African American men the right to vote. Now, this, of course, left freedom fighters like Mary Meachum, who was a woman, without the ability to exercise such right. She, in her day, and me, if I were living in her day, would have been excluded from the exercise of the franchise. But the good news is that by August of 1920, 100 years ago, the 19th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States would correct for this oversight, this exclusion of women, proclaiming that the right to vote shall not be denied or abridged on account of sex. Now, the reality, however, is that the 19th Amendment really mainly benefited white women, since the rise of Jim Crow following the Civil War resulted in African Americans really having governments and other powers and authorities actively seek to withhold such a right as voting, actively seek to interfere with the exercise of the franchise. Now, by 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed, and it outlawed the discrimination in voting practices. It said that voting practices, largely in southern states, adopted after the Civil War, that created conditions where Black people couldn't vote, were no longer legal. And it said that African American women and men could exercise regularly the right to vote. So, as you heard me say earlier, this year is a watershed year because 150 years ago, the right to vote was extended through the 15th Amendment to African American men. And 100 years ago, the right to vote was extended to women, right, through the passage of the 19th Amendment. And 55 years ago, the right to vote was really extended even more fully through the Voting Rights Act to all Black men and women, and in fact, all Americans, regardless of their ethnicity or their racial background. So now, why are all of these watershed efforts to advance voting rights so important today? Why are they so important right now, in this very moment? Because this year, we have a historic election before us that harkens us back to our very beginnings, to our earliest days as a nation, and that asks us to consider what kind of country do we want to live in? Now, whatever your background or political affiliation, my hope is that you will agree that we want to live in a country where all men, all women, all gender non-conforming people are created equal and endowed with certain unalienable rights, chiefly the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Remember that the only way for us to live into these rights is by giving our consent to the exercise of power by our governments. And the way that we consent and dissent happens to be straight through the path of voting. Join me in November. Remember to vote. Freedom fighters like Mary Meachum and countless others fought for it, and now it's our turn to do our part.
Now, there were key figures of the African American Women's Club movement. Mary Church Terrell, she is credited as the founder of the Women's Club movement. She was also affiliated with Howard University, and her husband was the principal of Dunbar High School. Mary Church Terrell will write many tracts on what she thought Black women should be doing to raise the race. She was also very instrumental in making sure that we were always thought of in a positive light. And Mary Church Terrell will also, and I'll talk about in just a few minutes, do something that will shut down a congressional appropriation, and this is amazing, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. And Ida B. Wells Barnett needs no introduction. We know the very actions of her, the very woman who will bring lynching to the international stage, the woman who tells the world on how lynching has become an American sport and begs the world to pay attention to this. And my personal favorite is Nannie Helen Burroughs. Now, Nannie Helen Burroughs has not gotten the national recognition that the other two women have, but she should, because Nannie Helen Burroughs is the founder of the National Baptist Convention's women's movement. She was a woman who could galvanize 3 million women to the movement. She had created a school for women to be able to be self-sufficient, to earn money for themselves. And in her school, she had gotten contracts to do the laundry for the White House. Nannie Helen Burroughs was a woman of immense intelligence, entrepreneurial skills, and just incredible person to me. And she created an international organization that did missionary work around the world.
Mrs. Trainer, I'm leaving now. All my work is finished. The roast is in the oven and will be done by the time Mr. Trainer get here.
But Gloria, it's barely 4 o'clock.
All my Tuesday work is done. All the ironing is done. The furniture is polished. Table set for dinner. You remember, I came in a little early to get it all done.
Tuesday. Isn't that when you colored women have your suffragette meetings? Mary Margaret's girl all of a sudden has started running out early on Tuesdays also.
Tuesday is meeting night, and what I do in my off time is mine to do.
Well, I don't know why you think you need the vote. I don't need the right to vote. I'm perfectly happy letting Mr. Trainer take care of the political matters. Women should be content to take care of their homes and raise their families.
Yes, Mrs. Trainer, that's one way of looking at it. Good night.
Gloria, you know getting the vote isn't going to change your life in any way. Seems like you colored people are always looking for something to stir up trouble.
Mrs. Trainer, let me ask you something. You said women should be content to take care of their homes and raise their children. Well, I seem to be the one who takes care of your house and mine. And as for raising children, I done help you raise yours. And what little time I have left at the end of the day, raise mine too.
Are you getting smart with me?
No, ma'am. I only asked what it is you meant by what women should be doing. I do that twice over. And colored women getting the right to vote isn't stirring up trouble. I care about who sits on the school board, same as you do. I pay taxes just like you do.
Well, white women are more genteel than you colored women. Well, not you, of course. You're a good Christian woman, but not everyone knows you. All I'm saying is you and your kind marching around in the street, making demands that are never going to be met. That looks bad. And everyone knows that colored women who march are of low moral character.
Mrs. Trainer, and I suppose that includes all the white women out here marching for the vote? And that means Susan B. Anthony and Alice Paul and all the thousands of other white women fighting for equal rights, including the right to vote?
Well, now, see, that is the problem. Men and women will never be equal, no more than you and I ever can be. Mr. Trainer says it's bad enough that Negro men have the right to vote. It's been the cause of so many problems. He says women are too scatterbrained to keep the issue straight in their minds and that they will be easily manipulated.
Is that what he says, does he? Does he mean all women, including you and his mother? Mrs. Trainer, what bank does your husband use? Have you ever written a check?
Well, it has national in the title. No, I've never written one. He takes care of all that. Why would you ask me something like that?
Because he signs all my checks. They're all signed by him. Mrs. Trainer, you may have this big house and more money than I do, but you are less free than I am.
What does that mean?
Do you think this is just about the vote?
Isn't it?
This is about women controlling their lives, making decisions, owning property, controlling their money. I may not have any, but what money I do have, no man is going to tell me how to use it. Without that freedom, this is just a pretty cage.
You just say that because you're not married.
That's why we march. I will choose a man who respects me as an equal or not at all. Well, I really must be going, or I'm going to miss the streetcar that I need. I'll see you tomorrow.
Gloria, I hope you'll think about what I have said. You getting the vote isn't going to make your life any better because you will still be a colored woman.
Yes, but I'll be a colored woman who can vote.
By 1913, there has been progress made. There is suffrage for women in certain states in the West. And progress, again, is being made. But the old leaders, Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, are up there in age. And younger women like Alice Paul are a little bit more militant about this. They figure this has gone on long enough. So Alice Paul goes to London and watches what the women do there, which are infinitely more militant and the things that they're doing to get the right to vote. And she comes back with a whole lot of new ideas. So by 1913, she comes back, and one of the things that when she comes back, she realizes we've just had an election, and there's going to be an inauguration in Washington, D.C. President Woodrow Wilson has just been elected. So she hits upon the spectacular idea of a women's parade in D.C. This has not been done before, and nothing on this level. And so she starts sending out the call to all the other suffrage clubs, both local and far, about this incredible idea about this parade. And this is not going to be just any parade. This is going to be the parade. And would hold it at the same time as the newly elected president would be having his inauguration. Washington would be awash with spectators from all over the country. She had planned pomp and circumstance, pageantry, including Inez Milholland, who was the suffragette known for her beauty, who would be leading the parade on a white horse wearing a shimmery long white cape that covered the horse's flanks. There would be multiple bands and floats and groups in matching regalia. And some of these groups would be marching because at this time, women now can go to college and they have careers. So they would be marching, there would be teachers marching, doctors marching. They would be marching as groups in their careers so that people watching can see that progress is being made by women. And she reaches out and people start responding. Now, not only, though, are these people marching in their groups, but they're marching professional groups, but they're marching in matching regalia. So enter Ida B. Wells and the Illinois delegation. So when the call goes out, states start responding on state level, local level, and the Illinois delegation is not segregated. I mean, my God, this is Illinois, the state of Abraham Lincoln. And so Ida B. Wells is a member on the state level as well as her own. Now, this is a picture, and again, the one on the left is kind of fuzzy because this is taken from the newspaper account at that time. So what happens is Ida B. Wells will go to Washington with her Illinois group. And the day before, that very morning, everybody's getting lined up, and word comes down that the colored women who are there have to march at the rear. I've wondered, couldn't understand. Now, in the 70s, I was in college and definitely part of the ERA movement, and I thought, why was this animosity between black and white women? I couldn't understand it. But this helped to understand it. The United Daughters of the Confederacy started a campaign with its membership and went to Congress because they wanted to put up a special statue. The 2,000 plus they had all over the nation, it wasn't enough. They remembered there was somebody they had left out of the mix. So they went to Congress and got an appropriation. They wanted this particular statue for a commemoration that was somebody who was prominent in the mythology of the lost cause. Now, this particular statue, they wanted it on a prominent location on the Washington Mall. This would be titled The Monument to the Faithful Colored Mammies of the South. This would be the Negro Mammy statue, and they had already collected funds. Now, I want you to understand that the United States Congress did set aside the initial $20,000 to buy the land that it was going to sit on. Now, Mary Church Terrell sent up the hue and cry among the colored women's clubs, and the national press found its voice, and this went national. It made the black population go ballistic. There was no way that statue was ever going to be put up. But you must read what Mary Church Terrell wrote, because that stopped it. So again, why did they want that statue? This would be the final knife through the heart of the way they viewed it, as a reminder to those who don't know their place. Rebecca Lattimore Felton, by appointment, was sworn in as the first woman senator to Congress. the seated senator from Georgia died suddenly. And they thought it would be a really good idea to get the women's vote if they swore in a woman. And so they did. She was chosen. She was 87 years old at the time. And she was a prominent socialite who was a writer, a progressive in some manners, such as prohibition, and a supporter of education reform and equal pay for women. However, she was an avowed former slave owner, a segregationist, who wrote and spoke in favor of lynching from Congress's floor, which she considered the ultimate weapon of law enforcement. Her term as senator only lasted 1 day. Now I'm going to move forward. I know it's skipping from 1924 until the 1980s. And we all know that we had a civil rights movement and a voting rights movement in between then. But I want to continue on some things you may not know. This man, this is Paul Weyrich, ultra-conservative co-founder of the Moral Majority, the Heritage Foundation, and think tanks the Free Congress Foundation and the American Legislative Exchange Council. The ideology that Paul Weyrich created is, even though he passed in 2008, is still very, very much with us. That entire group of legislators that came in under the Tea Party is his brainchild. And we know that they are still very much with us. And we know because he stated that they were there to disrupt the Republican Party. They were there as radicals. Now, I want to really, really stress to you one of his statements that they live by. And what he said, stated simply and plainly: I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by the majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down. He further stated, whatever means that you can use to keep them from the polls, let it be. Sound familiar? And for the record, Hillary Clinton was not the first woman to run for president for a major party. Shirley Chisholm ran as a Democrat in 1972. On February 20th, 1895, Frederick Douglass will speak at the National Council of Women's meeting. And there, sharing the stage, was Susan B. Anthony. And the two had not spoken directly since 1870. The two old warriors hugged and lamented how they had missed each other. They talked afterwards and promised to meet again the next day. He went home and excitedly told his wife about the reconciliation and said he was going to rest before dinner. And as he walked out the room, she heard him hit the floor. He died from a combination of stroke and heart attack. He was 77 years old.
The only thing we did wrong, stayed in the wilderness a day too long. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on. Work all day, work all night, just to keep my voting rights. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on.
What I have talked to you today about is the past. It hurts me as a cultural preservationist, to hear people say they weren't going to vote. I hope that I have brought to your attention just a little bit of the violence, the pain, the racism that we have faced for this right. Now, I didn't talk about the movement of the 60s because that's current history, but because most people don't know beyond that. We have talked about or covered the contested past of voting rights in this country. Who got them? You voting is about power and control. As long as I and those who share my ideals are in power, then everything is fine because I am in control. This is what the powers that be think. This is what Paul Rayridge says. But as others with different idea and uses for that power want to have a say in how that power is used, or worse yet, that they have the same amount of power that he does, then that is a problem. Especially when these usurpers are beings that I have always thought inferior to myself. Those are the people in control. Remember what he said. If you stay home, I win. Do it. Stay home. I want you to. I don't want you to vote. He's made that very clear. Him and most of the people sitting in Washington today. Pay attention. History has shown us those in power, there is no form of violence that is too extreme to keep that power and to keep the other from voting. Thousands have died for that right to vote, or for even trying to vote. Blacks have systematically been stripped of land and other forms of material wealth as they have been dislodged from their homes, ran out of town, only for whites to take over their homes. You saw July try to vote, but didn't tell you what happened. When July was kicked out of the polling place, he went to one of the another colored man's house, and he was seen. It was rumored then to the white folks in town that the colored folks was planning an uprising. Well, they formed a mob. They called other whites around the area there in Orange County, and they descended on the house. They called out the owner, and he came out to see, what the problem was, and they said he was under arrest. Didn't tell him why, okay? And so he said he wanted to go in and get his coat, and when he went to turn around, the sheriff grabbed him, knocked him in the head with the butt of his rifle, and then the owner, his daughter, who was in the house, stuck a gun out the door and shot and wounded a man. And needless to say, it was on and popping then. When the events are over, we don't know exactly how many people are killed. Because, and I'm going to tell you why, there were sugar fields around, there were swamps around. Most of the time, when they set the houses on fire, when people tried to leave, they were shot at and forced back into the homes. This is getting rid of evidence. We have no idea how many people were in the houses when they burnt the houses down on top of them. Now, the houses that were nice enough that they decided they wanted to live in afterwards, they didn't torch, okay? And we know that because the man who went to go vote sometime later, I think the judge of the county moved into his house. Oh, he's supposed to have given the wife like pennies on the dollar for it. It wasn't negotiated. He just sent her a check, okay? So this happened quite a bit. And it normally happened among black people, whether we're talking about Black Wall Street or whether we're talking about any of the other massacre sites that happened during this time period. When blacks rose up enough to have something, when you stuck your head up, you might have power. You might, I don't know, be my equal? No, that's never going to happen. We have to fix that.
The one thing we did right was the day we started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. We fought jail and violence too, but God's love has seen us through. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on.
Still not going to vote? Let's talk about now. Let's talk about violence was used in the past for voter suppression. Let's talk about now. Oh, we've changed a little bit because, we would have society frowning on us if we did a lot of the stuff from before. And then again, now some of this stuff is illegal, okay? So, disenfranchising felons and ex-felons from voting. Florida. 2/3 of Florida voted, 2 years ago to reinstate felons if they had paid, or should I say, met their requirements for their release. And of course, we know the Florida legislature comes back and says, oh, well, wait a minute. You still own fines and fees. But their record system is such a mess, nobody knows what those fees are. So, an organization is developed that starts combing these records and helping, and then we know what Michael Bloomberg did, and starts being able to pay off over 31,000 of these ex-felons' fines, and now the state's going, whoa, hold on. So they're gonna charge a poll tax. People get around that to be able to, pay their poll tax to be able to vote, and now the state's going, wait a minute. He's paying them to vote? Come on now, get real. When is this going to stop? Let's talk about gerrymandering. Lucky so far that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was still alive when that went before the Supreme Court this year, because if it went there next year, gerrymandering would still be okey doke. So that one for us, the specter of voting fraud for reason for strict voter IDs. And that's nascent. They have not been able to come up with any instances where this has been such a huge problem that all of these states need voter IDs. And they know it's a hardship for people of color. Most of them don't own cars anyway, or older people, but you got to have one. Restricting early voting. How about the mail thing, okay? That's a new one, and you have to like that. I wonder who sits up and thinks of all of this, and why? What are they afraid of? Closing polling places. Well, we know, courtesy of Stacey Abrams, there were places in Georgia that people had to go miles and miles, 20 miles, to be able to find a polling place. Exact match excuses to delete names from voter rolls. We know if I've registered to vote 15 years ago, my signature, because I've gotten older, has changed. Doesn't matter. They're doing data dumps. Doesn't matter. Only if they get caught. Now, the next one is a personal favor. The Brennan Law Center out of New York this is a big bugaboo with them. Stacking the courts with federal judges who are hostile to minorities and to voters' rights, whom the American bar says are totally unqualified for the job. Republican-led states are increasingly buying voting machines that are hackable and have no paper trails. And the one I like the best that just came out of Tennessee last year was to criminalize voter registration drives.
Work all day and work all night just to keep our voting rights. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on.
Still not going to vote? Let's talk about the future. With the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and a 6-3 conservative court, we can probably expect the rest of the 1965 Civil Rights Act to be gutted. Already, with a 5-4 decision by the Supreme Court, they've already got rid of the consent decrees of which most of the South was under by saying, well, they've learned to behave themselves, and so I think they no longer have to apply to make any changes to their voting laws. Well, guess what happened? That's when we started getting voter IDs, data dumps, and what is currently going on now. They want to get rid of the rest of it, so we can wave it goodbye. We can expect Obamacare to be stripped, be so stripped as to be non-existent. The current administration has made it all about the courts, though this has been quietly accomplished. As of Wednesday, September 2nd, there were still 76 federal judges' seats unfulfilled, and Mitch McConnell has been working on about filling 3 a day instead of COVID recovery. These are lifetime appointments, and just in case you didn't know, and I mean just in case also he loses the Senate. Now, we've heard President Trump say at several of his rallies that he has filled more judge appointments than anybody else, 187 at last counts. You know, he's not talking about little bitty circuit judgeships. He's talking about lifetime appointments. And people, you need to understand this, that one day soon, if you need justice, it ain't gonna be there. Understand? You need to vote. The court will probably rule in favor of the use of law and order tools such as automatic license plate readers. These have already come under such scrutiny because of the high error rates and the impact on civil rights and civil liberties, where you have the expectation of privacy. Somebody, somewhere, is tracking every move you make in your car. And here's the thing. This is tracked forever, okay? I mean, it's not like they're just tracking it one day, just your whereabouts for one day. Somebody can pull this up 10 years from now on what you did on this particular day. You need to be concerned about this. Seriously. Immigration, DACA. Okay. Something else, and I just kind of put this out there because I'm a legal beagle. I mean, I'm all into the law. I mean, I'm sorry, that's just one of my things. But there are 24 states that have all white Supreme Court benches. And a quarter of those states have populations that are 1/4 people of color. So the top legal authority of those states do not reflect the population of the people who reside there. So Still not going to vote? It's not just the courts. Your civil liberties, your personal rights are being stolen from underneath you. I'm an old woman. Some of you aren't. You're going to have to live under this. All I can do is to bring this to your attention. You must participate in your democracy. I want you to understand the risk that she took, because under Missouri law, like all slaveholding states, black people, free black people, who were caught aiding and abetting could be placed as punishment into slavery. But obviously, she thought it was worth it. All you have to do is vote. Vote. Please. I thank you for sharing your afternoon with us. Next year, I hope to meet you at the site. And on behalf of the Mary Meachum Celebration Board, have a wonderful year. Thank you.
The only thing we did wrong, stayed in the wilderness a day too long. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. Work all day, work all night, just to keep my voting rights. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. The one thing we did right was the day we started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on.